Hey, everyone! If you enjoy my quantum audiobooks, you can support me by becoming a Patreon member. Your support helps me keep creating, and you'll get exclusive perks. You can also access my audiobooks directly through Google Drive. Check out the link in the description. Now, let's get started.
Everyone entered the cave. The cave was dark, except for Merlin and Zheng Bin. Everyone else had prepared tools. They used tools to illuminate the cave, and the scenery inside was instantly clear. This cave was very narrow, and you could see the end at a glance, and it looked no different from an ordinary cave. It was just that everyone had just been attacked by countless shells, and no matter who it was, they would not think that this was just an ordinary cave. Tony Stark must be hiding in it. Zheng Bin saw Merlin standing aside with a smile on his face, looking like he was standing by and watching. He knew this man's bad taste very well, and knew that he must be standing aside to watch the show, and he couldn't count on him. Chala ordered his men, "Find the mechanism as soon as possible. The person we are looking for must be hiding here." Chala's men just approached the wall, and suddenly, silver liquid quickly covered the wall, blocking their movements. Almost in the blink of an eye, the whole cave was covered with mercury. The smooth mercury emitted a glittering silver light, just like a mirror 283, and people could clearly see their faces on it. Everyone looked at Zheng Bin, and they knew who had created this scene at a glance. Under everyone's gaze, the mercury covering the walls, the top of the cave, and the ground suddenly emerged with various weapons. Laser guns, sonic cannons. Zheng Bin used mercury to explore the entire cave, and it took less than 10 seconds to dismantle all the mechanisms and weapons released by Tony Stark and Ulysses Claw. After Zheng Bin removed the mercury from the cave, everyone saw the weapons on the ground that had just been spit out by mercury, and they felt scared. If they had just explored the cave by themselves, they would have likely triggered the mechanisms of these weapons. In such a narrow cave, if these weapons were triggered, the consequences would be disastrous. They could already imagine themselves being beaten into a pile of mud. Everyone thought at the same time that it was fortunate that Takashi Saka was here this time. The stone wall at the end of the cave slowly opened to both sides. After the stone wall was completely opened, the scene inside was so spectacular that it was speechless. No one could have imagined that such a space was hidden deep in this cave. There were more than a dozen floors here, and there were many abandoned military trucks and rusty weapons on the ground. Captain Magnesium, this should be the former Soviet military base, but be careful. Captain Magnesium raised his shield to block several bullets that were shot from nowhere. These bullets are shot from different angles. There must be other people here. Chala, they should be Ulysses Klau's men. Black Widow, they are all hiding in the dark, waiting to ambush us. We must be careful. Hawkeye, can you analyze which direction these bullets are coming from? Hawkeye heard what Black Widow said and immediately squatted down and looked carefully at the bullets on the ground. These bullets are obviously shot from a high place, I guess. Bang, bang, bang. Except Hawkeye was interrupted by the sound of several bodies falling to the ground before he finished speaking. A small silver ball slowly flew back from the air to Zheng Bin's open palm. BR. When these mercenaries fired their bullets just now, Zheng Bin had already seen their positions clearly. While they were talking, he killed all the mercenaries hiding in the high places with mercury. Captain of Magnesium, it seems that this place has been cleaned up. Let's go. Chala glanced at his men, who nodded slightly and then quietly turned on the detector hidden in the glasses. This detector was invented by Princess Shu Rue, which can penetrate the wall and analyze the people and objects in the entire room. Soon, she found that there were many sophisticated instruments hidden underground. It seems that there are other spaces hidden underground. Chala saw his men blinking at him and instantly understood what he meant. This place is too big. Why don't we act separately so that the search will be faster? Chala's purpose of coming here this time is Ulysses Clow, and he doesn't want to cause any trouble. No matter what the reason is for this group of Avengers to find Tony Stark, it has nothing to do with him. The captain of Magnesium agreed to Chala's proposal. He could see that Chala didn't seem to be with the Avengers. Zheng Bin came for Chala, and he would definitely act with Chala. The captain of Magnesium actually didn't want to be separated from Zheng Bin. Zheng Bin's existence could be said to be the greatest guarantee for their lives. But he thought about Zheng Bin's attitude towards Tony Stark before. He was also a little worried that Zheng Bin would threaten Tony Stark's safety. The best way now is for the two teams to search separately, and they find Tony Stark before Zheng Bin. Seeing that the captain of Magnesium had reached a consensus with him, Chala prepared to leave with his men. However, Zheng Bin did not follow them, but stood still. Mr. Zheng, Chala looked at Zheng Bin with an inquiring look. I'm too lazy to play hide-and-seek. Merlin, where's the person I'm looking for? At this time, Merlin, who had not said much and had a look of watching a good show, finally spoke. He pointed to the wall opposite where they were standing. Impossible. There is nothing there. Chala's men said immediately. She trusted her country's technology very much. Since the detector told her that there was nothing here, there must be nothing. The person they were looking for must be underground. And she didn't believe this weird man. Although this man had just shown great strength, this person looked like he didn't care about anything. She didn't believe he was really here to help. Zheng Bin ignored the bald black woman's rebuttal, and a small silver bead floated above his palm. The bead was spinning, and then it became bigger and bigger. Finally, it became a huge amount of sphere and rushed to the location Merlin said. Bang! After a loud bang, the wall was broken, and a huge amount of hole appeared. And the big ball made of mercury did not stop, but shuttled quickly inside. Two steel battle suits flew out of the big hole. Damn it! Stark, didn't you say there's a way to hide it from them? I have already hidden it from the group of people in Wakanda. But unfortunately, there are other people here, which are some uncontrollable factors. Plus. Hearing the sound coming from the two mechas, everyone was shocked. Ulysses Clow. Chala looked at the battle suit flying in the air with hatred. Chala ordered his men, shoot him down. After that, he shouted to the battle suit, Ulysses Clow, I will use your blood to commemorate my father. Chala's men took their weapons and shot at the flying mecha. And the Avengers would not stand idly by. They were attacking Tony Stark's mecha. The only Falcon with flight ability also flew into the air and chased after Tony Stark. Tony, we know your situation very well. Let's help you. Don't do anything that you will regret. The captain of Magnesium persuaded Tony Stark on the ground. Forget it, Captain. Your old-fashioned rhetoric is useless to me. Tony Stark and Ulysses Cloud dodged flexibly in the sky. Tony Stark fired a laser at the top of the cave with a palm cannon, and a big hole was immediately broken in the cave. Hawkeye yelled, Damn it, this is the inside of the snow mountain. The outsiders fell in and trapped us. Immediately, a silver film covered the big hole and blocked it. This film spread outward and soon covered the walls and the ground of the entire cave. Please give me flowers? Tony Stark tried to fire a few lasers at the wall with his palm cannon. After these lasers hit the wall, there was not even a spark. The wall was smooth. Ulysses Klaus saw this and shouted to Tony Stark, Use vibranium shells. Don't I know that I should use vibranium shells at this time? Do you have to shout that the whole world knows what weapons we are using? Vibranium shells? Everyone couldn't keep calm after hearing this, including the people from Wakanda. 0. Wakanda never uses it in front of people from other countries, but many of their weapons also use bullets made of vibranium. Therefore, they know the power of vibranium shells better than anyone else. The hardest metal in the world, vibranium, if used as bullets and paired with powerful weapons, nothing in the world can withstand its power. They feel that even Zheng Bin's magical mercury is equally invincible. By then, they will really be buried in the avalanche. 2 rows of gun muzzles rose from the shoulders of Tony Stark's battlesuit. Falcon waved his steel wings and wanted to stop him, but was kicked to the ground by Ulysses Clow. Falcon's body sank into the ground and fainted directly, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Sam, the captain of the Magnesium country, shouted and rushed towards Falcon. Tony Stark, JRVS, fire vibranium shells. The shells shot from the shoulders of Tony Stark's battlesuit towards the surrounding walls. The captain of the Magnesium country shouted, No. Tony, Everyone could only stand on the ground and watch the shells hit the wall. But the terrifying scene did not happen. These shells did not penetrate the wall. But just like before outside the cave, these shells were absorbed by the mercury. In just a few seconds, only half of them were still outside the air. But before they could breathe a sigh of relief, only half of the shells outside exploded. Deafening noises rang out in this closed space. It turns out that the focus of this vibranium shell is not the hardness of vibranium metal, but the large-scale explosion developed by Tony Stark. 667. The combination with vibranium metal is many times more powerful than ordinary metal. Tony Stark wanted to use these powerful explosions to blast a gap in the mercury, and they wanted to rush out at the moment the gap opened. No, the gap they thought did not appear. Tony Stark scanned the wall with a battle suit, and JRVSS voice sounded, "Mr. Stark, the scan is complete. The damage to the wall is 0.001%, and it is not damaged enough for you and Mr. Kerfang to pass through." 0.001%. Almost negligible. The steel battle suit that Ulysses Clow wore also gave him the same information. Ulysses Clow collapsed and screamed after hearing this. How is it possible? Such a power can blow a hole several tens of meters deep in the earth. Even vibranium can't resist it. How could such a thin layer of metal not be damaged? Merlin couldn't help laughing when he heard this. How can vibranium be compared with the mercury of the first emperor? Hearing this, everyone looked at Guanji. Even when the vibranium shells came out and everyone was panicking, he didn't even raise his eyebrows. It was as if everything was already under his control. I don't know if it was because of the illusion caused by the ancient costumes that represented the imperial power, or because of his steady posture. They actually felt the majesty of the emperor in Zheng Bin. One sentence can cause millions of corpses to fall and rivers to flow thousands of miles. It is precisely because he firmly controls the life and death of others that he can be so calm from beginning to end. Because the life and death of others is just a matter of his thoughts. Even the people of Wakanda feel that the pressure on Zheng Bin is something they have never seen in their own king. He is more like a king than T'Challa. They are more in awe of Zheng Bin than T'Challa. The captain of the Wakanda Guard noticed his thoughts and couldn't help but curse himself. T'Challa is their king, and such thoughts are really blasphemy against the king. The Avengers, who always thought that the Emperor's names Zheng Bin called were just nicknames, also began to doubt. Such momentum and pressure, are they really just nicknames? But if these are really the abilities of the first Emperor, why have they never been mentioned in history books? And if the first Emperor really has such abilities, then let alone unifying the six kingdoms. With his own strength, he can completely unify the world. Looking at Zheng Bin's calm face, everyone held their breath and fell silent. Only Ulysses Clow in midair was still talking. "Tony Stark, you hurry up and find a way for me. You cheated me of so much vibranium. Are you going to let it go?" When Ulysses Clow was cursing, he was completely unaware that danger was approaching him. The mercury on the wall closest to him suddenly changed its shape, extending several spikes and stabbing him. Warning, there is a weapon approaching. It is judged to be 5 meters long and made of mercury. Hearing the reminder from the artificial intelligence in the battle suit, Ulysses Clow activated the ignition device on his feet, hoping to avoid the attack. However, the speed of these spikes was very fast, and they pierced Ulysses Clow's limbs in an instant. "Ah!" Ulysses cried out in pain, and the mecha on his body also flashed with fire and smoke. It seemed that the mecha on his limbs had been damaged, and the ignition device on his feet had gone out. The mercury was inserted into Ulysses' wound, and he flew to Zheng Bin. The mercury inserted into his leg directly hit the ground, making him kneel directly in front of Takashi Saka. Tony Stark was not surprised at all that the mercury easily pierced the mecha he developed. Although the metal of these mechas is mixed with vibranium, it will normally become very hard and can at least block a few missiles. But Zheng Bin's mercury can block even pure vibranium shells, not to mention these mixed metals. Tony 3.4 Stark saw that his accomplice had been caught and knew that it was impossible to defeat Zheng Bin with his ability. So before Zheng Bin attacked him with Mercury, he flew to Ulysses Klau's side. Zheng Bin turned his eyes away from Ulysses Klau and looked at Tony Stark. Zheng Bin's eyes were calm, but the longer he was stared at, the more palpitations Tony Stark felt. It was as if his life no longer belonged to him. Finding that Tony Stark did not understand what he meant, Zheng Bin spoke. He said indifferently, "Kneel down." "What?" "Kneel down." Tony Stark is a man who knows the current situation. Although he has the arrogance of a genius, he will not mind making some compromises for his life when facing danger. After all, life is the most important thing. As long as he keeps his life, he will have plenty of ways to retaliate in the future. But this time, in front of Zheng Bin's absolute power, Tony Stark found that he could not compromise. Maybe it's because they have the same blood. Or maybe even if Tony Stark's character has been affected, in his subconscious, he still wants to retain his dignity as a father. Anyway, Tony Stark doesn't want to kneel in front of Zheng Bin now. Tony Stark still stood straight in the same place, as if he didn't hear what Zheng Bin said. Black Widow knew that Zheng Bin's character was not easy to get along with, not to mention that he was affected now. So he persuaded him, "Tony, get off the horse." Tony Stark was a little angry. "No." Two mercury spikes rose from the ground and pierced the mecha on Tony Stark's legs without hesitation. In the severe pain, Tony Stark knelt on the ground with both knees. After adapting to the strong pain, he began to move his legs and struggled hard. No, I will never kneel down." "Sir, it is detected that the muscles and fascia of the calf are seriously damaged. If you continue to move your calf, the damage will be more serious. There is a 90% chance of death from excessive blood loss and a 64% chance of amputation." JRVS's reminder sounded in the mecha, but Tony Stark ignored it and just struggled desperately. Under Tony Stark's shrill cry, Zheng Bin looked at Chala. "He is yours." After being caught, Ulysses Klau huddled aside like a quail and dared not speak, fearing that he would attract the attention of Takashi Saka. At this time, he heard Zheng Bin's words and begged for mercy. "Mr. Zheng, I have a lot of vibranium. If you let me go, I will give you all the remaining vibranium. And all the money I have earned over the years, I will give you all." Hearing these words, Chala looked at Ulysses Klau with even more horror, as if he wanted to peel his skin alive. Chala walked towards Ulysses Klau step by step with a pistol. He took off the battle suit on Ulysses Klau's head with force, and the originally ferocious face now only had fear and pleading. "It was you, this disgusting, greedy killer who killed my father. Go to hell and repent." Bang! After a gunshot, a bloody hole appeared on Ulysses Klau's forehead, and he fell down. Chala acted very quickly, without any hesitation or struggle, reflecting the decisiveness of a ruler. "Mr. Zheng, can you untie Tony first?" The captain of the Magnesium Country saw blood oozing out of the wounded hole of Tony Stark's battlesuit and was a little anxious. "Although he has done many wrong things, please let the law punish him instead of letting him die from excessive blood loss here. After all, he is also yours." The captain of the Magnesium Country had not finished speaking when he saw Zheng Bin's eyes looking at him suddenly become 640 sharp. Under the strong pressure, he interrupted his words. The captain of the Magnesium Country felt huge amounts of danger and subconsciously picked up the shield to block himself. It was too scary. That look told him that the man in front of him had killed countless people. Otherwise, there would be no such strong murderous intent. The look in Zheng Bin's eyes was more terrifying than all the enemies he had ever seen. Captain America felt unprecedented pressure from Zheng Bin. After Zheng Bin removed his extension, the captain of the Magnesium Country finally breathed a sigh of relief, but he didn't dare to speak again for fear of angering Zheng Bin. Just a question also left a seed in his heart. Is this really the momentum that ordinary people can have? Will it be? Chala, Mr. Zheng, I have solved all the problems. We can leave now. Zheng Bin nodded after hearing what Chala said. At this time, Tony Stark also fainted due to excessive blood loss. The Avengers looked anxious after hearing what Chala said. They needed a living Tony Stark. The situation in San Francisco was so urgent that without Tony Stark, there was no way to control the riot. But no one dared to give Zhang Bin advice. Not only did they give advice, they didn't even dare to make eye contact with Zhang Bin. The only person who was not afraid of Zhang Bin at the scene was Merlin, but he always stood aside with a smile and never took the initiative to help, just like a background board. Zhang Bin condensed a huge amount of mercury floor and let all the people in Wakanda stand on it. Then he controlled the mercury floor and left the cave. Not long after Zhang Bin left the cave, the water hole inserted in Tony Stark's leg also disappeared. Black Widow searched for a long time on Tony Stark's body, but couldn't find the button to release the battle suit. Captain of Magnesium, we need to treat Tony's wound immediately. Black Widow, Pepper should know how to release it. Call her. No signal here. Captain of Magnesium looked at Merlin. Can you take us away from here? Definitely. Merlin performed the same magic as before, and everyone floated up with the wind. When the Avengers came out of the cave, they found that Zhang Bin and his group were no longer there. Zhang Bin and Chala and his group stood on a white snowy ground outside the cave. Now that things have been done, they can go back to New York. It's just that Francis Drake's card cannot be summoned again because of the frozen time. In the Rider card in the Heroic Spirit Library, he is the only heroic spirit with a treasure that can allow so many people to ride. System, help me summon Edward Bakey. Okay. After a burst of light, the notorious pirate in history, Blackbeard, appeared on the snow. Edward Teach looked very unruly, with his upper body naked and only wearing an open long coat on the outside. When he was first summoned, he looked careless, but when he saw Zhang Bin, he was stunned. He had sailed on the sea for many years, staring at the ships of high officials and nobles and robbing poor fishing boats. It can be said that he has seen countless people. Although Zhang Bin's expression is very peaceful now, there's a kind of aura of majesty without anger. Intuition tells him that the current master is very scary. So his attitude obviously became respectful. Master, do you have any instructions for summoning me out? Release the Queen Annie's revenge and take us back to New York. Yes. Edward Teach, who usually loves to talk nonsense, didn't say a word this time and immediately released the treasure. Because the people of Wakanda had the experience of Francis's golden deer before, they were not surprised to see the big ship appearing out of thin air again, and they boarded the ship with calm expressions. The reaction of the people made Edward Teach, who was very confident in his ship, very dissatisfied. His Queen Annie was so majestic. Why were these people so cold after seeing her? Shouldn't they praise her endlessly? Edward Teach found that Zhang Bin was looking up and down at his ship, as if he was very interested. So he overcame his fear and moved closer to Zhang Bin. Master, what do you think of my Queen Annie? Not very good. It has to be said that the C-level treasure and the A-level treasure are really far apart. This gap is not only reflected in the attack power, but also in the aesthetics. Compared with Francis's gorgeous golden deer, this ship is really too mediocre. It's just a larger wooden ship. Edward Teach, who was hit, dare not be angry and could only take everyone back to New York with grievance. After returning to New York, Zhang Bin recalled Edward Teach to the Heroic Spirit Library. Chalice sincerely thanked Zhang Bin. Mr. Zhang, thank you very much for your help this time. If it weren't for you, we don't know when we can find Ulysses Clow, and we are likely to lose our lives in this battle. It was you who saved us. Zhang Bin raised his hand and interrupted Chalice's endless thanks. If it's money, you're tired today, go back and rest first. If you have anything to say, we will talk later. After everyone from Wakanda left, Zhang Bin returned to Shinkojio. At the moment, it was already 3 a.m., and there were no employees in Shinkojio. Zhang Bin arrived at the building, a large warehouse that had not been used yet, empty and empty. He raised his hand, and huge amounts of silver balls appeared on the floor of the warehouse. The silver ball was so large that it almost filled the entire warehouse. After Zhang Bin put his hand down, the mercury on the surface of the silver ball slowly faded, and the things wrapped in mercury scattered all over the floor. Cash, weapons, gold, and silver treasures filled this originally empty warehouse instantly. These things were found by Zheng Bin when he covered the cave with mercury. This Russian cave is actually the base camp of Ulysses Clow. He had all the things he had plundered over the years there. This time the harvest was quite rich. Countless treasures appeared in front of Zheng Bin, but he didn't need to count them. The mercury had already made him feel what he had gained this time. Zheng Bin didn't care about the old collections, countless gold and silver jewelry, and a large amount of cash. Bringing them back was just a convenience. What Zheng Bin really valued here was a detailed diagram of the weapon. Sonic weapons. Although Ulysses Clow looked like a big and strong man, it was unexpected that he actually had a doctorate in physics. Ulysses Clow was an expert in this field. In addition to sonic weapons, he also began to study how to control sonic waves and make them form any new equipment. Even used sonic waves to make creatures. However, this 753 research is still in the preliminary stage, and Ulysses Clow died before it could make any progress. However, now that he has the diagram of the sonic weapon, he has a deeper understanding of this field. He can continue Ulysses Clow's research on this basis. If the power of the sonic weapon after its development can really meet Ulysses Clow's idea and build a new creature, then the military power of the Earth will be improved by several levels. And in this vast universe, at least there will be the ability to protect itself. The next day, Chakra came to God Industry as agreed. This time, if it weren't for you, we would have died in Mousy country. In addition to the 50 kilograms of vibranium I promised you, I will give you another 100 kilograms to thank you for saving my life. That's a total of 150 kilograms of vibranium? Zheng Bin raised his eyebrows after hearing this. See, this number is very shocking for other countries in the world except Wakanda. No country has so much vibranium now. Even the world's superpower magnesium does not have it. Most of their vibranium has been used to make the shield of the captain of magnesium decades ago. Think about the value of vibranium and its scarcity. The king of Wakanda has shown his full sincerity. However, after T'Challa finished speaking, he showed an embarrassed expression on his face. He used to think that vibranium was the hardest metal in the world. He has always been proud of the fact that his country is rich in vibranium. So when Zheng Bin asked for vibranium, he definitely thought that Zheng Bin had discovered there the secret of Wakanda is coveting their vibranium. It was not until he saw the silvery metal in Mousy country that he realized that there was a metal on Earth that was even more powerful than vibranium. Zheng Bin called this metal mercury. How could this be mercury? T'Challa knew what mercury looked like. Mercury could not possibly have such hardness. He guessed that this metal must be very rare, perhaps from the universe. After all, Zheng Bin's entry and exit into the universe was as simple as going on vacation abroad. Since Zheng Bin had such a precious metal, how could he covet vibranium? T'Challa felt very embarrassed whenever he thought of his original guess. After hearing Zheng Bin say, "Happy cooperation. I am very happy to get such precious vibranium." T'Challa even suspected that Zheng Bin was mocking him. It was the first time that T'Challa felt that vibranium was not enough as a gift. So he said again, "Mr. Zheng, my gratitude to you is not something that vibranium can express. I, T'Challa, owe you a favor. If you need any help in the future, please feel free to contact me." Although T'Challa did not make a promise to Zheng Bin in the name of Wakanda, but the promise of the king of Wakanda, the current Black Panther, is still very important. Maintaining a friendly relationship with such a person is icing on the cake for Zheng Bin. Just as Zheng Bin and T'Challa were chatting and laughing, Pepper also rushed to the hospital where Tony Stark was with an unmanned armor. After she walked into the ward, she saw two Avengers waiting by Tony Stark's bed. They were Black Widow and Captain Magnesium. At first glance, the two had just finished a battle and had not had time to take care of themselves. They looked disheveled and ragged. Pepper looked at Tony Stark lying unconscious on the hospital bed with distress. "How is he now?" "He lost too much blood and fell into a coma temporarily. But he had a blood transfusion last night, so he should wake up soon. It's just that the wound on his leg will take some time to recover." Pepper was relieved after hearing this. As long as there is no danger to his life, it's fine. Captain America looked at the unmanned battlesuit next to Pepper in confusion. Is this the bodyguard you brought specially? No, Pepper denied. This is actually... Hi, Captain. Tony Stark's voice came from the unmanned battlesuit. I'm Tony Stark's conscience. Black Widow, are you Tony Stark's backup? You can say that, but compared to backup, I prefer the word conscience. Captain Magnesium had already learned from Black Widow that Tony Stark had backed up his consciousness. He also knew that the backup had tried to invade Tony Stark's consciousness and wanted to turn him back to his original self. It's a pity that they failed. Captain Magnesium, I thought you were eliminated before. If you were always there, why didn't you come out during the San Francisco riots? Captain Magnesium's last sentence was questioning. Why did the Avengers go to great lengths to find Tony Stark? It was because only Tony Stark could solve the current situation in San Francisco. Now they suddenly knew that this good Tony Stark had always been there. If that was the case, why didn't he come out to help them? Pepper, you're right. He disappeared before. It's all my fault. I thought Tony's consciousness was integrated successfully and he had returned to his previous state. Who knew he was just acting? He deleted all the backups while I was careless. That's why Tony Stark's conscience never appeared. Pepper became more and more excited and finally looked at Captain America with an accusing look. You and Tony have been comrades for so long. Don't you have even this little trust in him? Do you think the real Tony Stark will be indifferent to the state of San Francisco? Captain, please be fair. Don't deny his previous efforts just because Tony was affected and changed his personality. The person who made these mistakes is not the real Tony Stark, because he has a heart warmer than anyone else. After saying the last sentence, Pepper burst into tears. She missed the old Tony Stark more than anyone else. After hearing this, the captain of the Magnesium country felt ashamed and guilty. What happened in San Francisco during this period of time brought him too much pressure. He couldn't help but blame Tony Stark for the mistakes. All this was caused by Tony Stark. It's all because he abused his intelligence. It's all his fault. Countless people blamed Tony Stark in front of the captain of the Magnesium country, although he would explain for Tony Stark every time. But he is not a saint either. After listening to so many bad things about Tony Stark, his heart also shifted a little. If Tony Stark is not so smart, it would be better. Captain Magnesium had forgotten, and everyone had forgotten. Tony Stark had used his intelligence to save so many people. Captain Magnesium was so ashamed that he couldn't look Tony Stark in the eye. Then he felt someone patting his shoulder twice. Tony Stark's conscience said, "It's not your fault, Captain. You don't need to feel guilty about it." Captain America's eyes were red when he heard this. Black Widow was also very touched when she saw this scene. But she found a flaw in Pepper's words and had to ask in a spoiler's way. You just said that your backups were destroyed, so who is this Tony Stark? Pepper, I asked Bin to help save a backup before. Tony's computer skills are so amazing that I didn't dare to ask Bin to get the backup back before, for fear that he would find out and even the last backup would be destroyed. After I confirmed that Tony was unconscious, I dared to go to Bin to get the backup. Pepper's expression was very serious. This is the last backup. Black Widow, since there's a backup, why don't you save a few more now, in case it fails again? Tony Stark's conscience interrupted. What kind of crappy file is the backup of my consciousness? Can be backed up by copying and pasting? A genius brain like mine is made up of huge data that you can't imagine. Do you think you can back it up with just a USB drive? It must be a special carrier to hold so much data. Please give me flowers. Point 0. Chili Pepper. Yes, those carriers have all been destroyed by Tony before. This is the last one. With the previous failed experience, Black Widow and Captain America both looked worried. If that's the case, can we solve the problem of San Francisco first and then try to integrate? Tony Stark's conscience, I can't solve the problem of San Francisco either. My memory stays a few years ago. And Extremis was completely evolved by him during the years I was missing. If I want to solve Extremis, it will take several years. San Francisco can't wait that long. If it goes on like this, not only San Francisco, but the entire country of Magnesium will be in chaos. And don't worry, this time, we're not going to integrate, but replace. Replace. Yes, Tony Stark's consciousness is too strong now. If integrate, he will definitely devour me. There's no point in doing this. The only way now is for me to kill Tony Stark's consciousness and then transfer the backup into his body. Captain of Magnesium, kill Tony? No, there must be other ways. Tony Stark said in a deep voice, "This is the only way." Captain, are you willing to believe me? Believe that I do this for the people of San Francisco. Believe that I'm not doing this to occupy Tony Stark's body. Believe that I don't want to kill the real Tony Stark more than anyone else. The expression of the Captain of Magnesium was solemn. The decision to kill his good friend made him very painful. But in the end, he still said, "I believe in your power." As soon as the captain of the Magnesium country finished speaking, the whole room seemed to be shrouded in a heavy atmosphere, and everyone's face was filled with complex emotions. Black Widow bit her lower lip tightly, her eyes flashing with unwillingness and determination. She knew the weight of this decision, but she had to face reality. Tony Stark's conscience slowly sighed, with a hint of imperceptible sadness in his voice. "Thank you, Captain. I know how difficult this is for you, but please believe that this is the best solution and we can give 040. For San Francisco, for the world, we must do this." Pepper was on the side, her hands clenched into fists, her eyes slightly red. She whispered, "Tony, he will definitely understand us, right? We are all trying to protect more people." Her voice was light, but firm, as if she was cheering herself up and everyone else. However, at this critical moment, a rapid alarm suddenly sounded in a corner of the room, breaking the original calm. An emergency notice flashed on the screen, showing that the situation in San Francisco was deteriorating rapidly. The number of extremist infected people increased sharply, and the city was about to fall into the brink of total loss of control. "No time." Black Widow stood up suddenly. His eyes were like torches. "We must act immediately. There can be no more hesitation." The captain of the Magnesium country took a deep breath, and his eyes became unusually firm. "Okay, we are ready to act. But, Tony Stark's conscience, you must ensure that once the action begins, it must succeed. We can't have a second chance of failure." "Don't worry, I will do my best." Tony Stark's conscience responded, revealing unquestionable determination in his tone. The plan was quickly formulated, and the group took the last backup and took a special flight, shuttling through the night and heading toward San Francisco. On the way, they were attacked by extremist infected people, and a fierce air battle ensued. Black Widow relied on superb skills, and Pepper used her wisdom to command the flight to evade flexibly, while the captain of the Magnesium country was responsible for protecting the safety of the backup and preventing it from falling into the hands of the enemy. After a tough battle, they finally arrived at Tony Stark's private laboratory, which is the best place for consciousness replacement. Inside the laboratory, high-tech equipment is lined up, flashing cold light, and the air is filled with tension and expectation. "Are you ready?" Tony Stark's conscience asked, his voice echoing in the empty laboratory, and it seemed particularly heavy. Everyone nodded. No words, only firm eye contact. With the sound of mechanical operation, the experimental table slowly rose, and Tony Stark's body lay there quietly, like a sleeping giant, waiting for the final awakening. At this moment, there was a sudden roar outside the laboratory, and a breath of despair spread. The source of extremists, a huge amount of mutant creatures, was approaching here, and they were attracted by their actions. "It seems that our time is more urgent than expected," Pepper said nervously. Her fingers tapped quickly on the console, trying to activate the defense system. "Prepare for consciousness replacement. No matter what happens, it cannot be interrupted." Tony Stark's conscience issued the final order. His voice echoed in everyone's heart, inspiring them to face the upcoming unknown challenges. The lights in the laboratory suddenly lit up, and a contest concerning the fate of mankind began. In the core area of the laboratory, a blue light slowly enveloped Tony Stark's body, which was a sign that Tony Stark's conscience was about to replace Consciousness 3.3. The surrounding high-tech equipment began to make a low, buzzing sound, as if to make the final warm-up for this critical moment. Hold on, hold on. Pepper's voice was trembling with a subtle tremor. She stared at the data on the console to ensure that the whole process was foolproof. However, at this moment, the laboratory's defense system suddenly sounded an alarm, indicating that huge amounts of mutant creatures had broken through the outer defense line and were approaching rapidly. It's coming. Black Widow's voice came from the communicator with a hint of urgency. We must speed up. Tony Stark's conscience felt the turmoil in the outside world in the consciousness space. He took a deep breath and stabilized his mind. Everyone, stay calm. This is the final test. We can't fail. Captain Magnesium stood at the entrance of the laboratory, holding a shield, ready to meet the upcoming impact. His eyes were both determined and deeply worried about Tony. He knew that if this operation failed, not only Tony might never wake up, but the whole world would face huge amounts of crisis. For Tony, for everyone, I will guard here, Captain Magnesium said firmly, his voice echoing in the laboratory, injecting new strength into everyone. Just then, the mutant creature let out a deafening roar, and its huge body slammed into the door of the laboratory. Captain Magnesium fought hard to resist, but the huge amounts of impact still forced him to retreat again and again. Hurry! Faster! Pepper shouted anxiously, her fingers flying on the console, trying to speed up the process of consciousness replacement. However, the power system of the laboratory fluctuated at this critical moment, and the blue light began to flicker. What's going on? Tony Stark's conscience asked anxiously in the consciousness space. The power system was attacked. Pepper replied, I'm trying my best to repair it, but it takes time. At this critical moment, Black Widow rushed out of the hidden passage of the laboratory, holding 2 guns and firing at the eyes of the mutant. The hot bullets drew bright trajectories in the night sky, temporarily slowing down the attack speed of the mutant. Hold on, I'll find its weakness, Black Widow shouted, her voice full of determination. With the joint efforts of everyone, the power system of the laboratory finally returned to stability. The blue light lit up again, and Tony Stark's conscience began to slowly merge into Tony's body. However, at this moment, the mutant suddenly let out a deafening roar, as if it felt threatened, and launched a fierce attack again. Hurry! Finish it! The captain of the Magnesium country shouted. His shield was already full of cracks, but he still firmly guarded the entrance of the laboratory. Finally, after a crisp sound, the blue light suddenly shrank, and Tony Stark's eyes slowly opened, and a new light flashed in his eyes. He sat up suddenly and punched the mutant creature away, showing unprecedented strength. I'm back. Tony Stark's voice echoed in the laboratory, full of strength and determination. However, when his eyes swept over everyone, he found the fatigue and scars on their faces. His heart tightened, and he understood the price he paid for waking up. You have all paid too much for me. Tony Stark's voice was a little choked. I swear, I will use all my strength to protect this world and make up for everything I have lost. Under the leadership of Tony Stark, everyone worked together and finally defeated the source of Extremis 590. And Tony Stark also found his new mission and meaning in the process. He is no longer the genius inventor who only pursues personal glory, but has become a true hero, a man who is willing to give everything to protect the world. Tony Stark stood on the ruins after the war, looking at the smoke gradually dissipating in the distance, with mixed feelings in his heart. Although he won the battle with the Shadow Council, the sacrifices and hardships in the process made him unforgettable. He gently stroked the scratches on the armor, each of which was a testimony to their side-by-side battle. Tony, we did it. The captain of the Magnesium Kingdom came over and patted him on the shoulder, with complex emotions flashing in his eyes. But this victory is only temporary. Although the Shadow Council has suffered a setback, their foundation has not been completely destroyed. Tony nodded, knowing this. He looked into the distance, and an unprecedented sense of responsibility surged in his heart. We must be more united, not only to prevent the revenge of the Shadow Council, but also to prevent similar threats from appearing again. At the same time, Tony's mind echoed the scene of fighting side by side with Obadiah Stan. Although they were enemies, at the critical moment, Obadiah showed courage and wisdom that made him look at him with admiration. After the battle, the two had an in-depth conversation, and Obadiah expressed his willingness to spend the rest of his life to make up for past mistakes and become one of the forces protecting the world. Tony, I am willing to be your backer, no matter what you need. Obadiah's voice echoed in Tony's ears, with a hint of sincerity and determination. Tony looked at Obadiah, and a warm current surged in his heart. He knew that the real hero did not lie in the mistakes of the past, but in the choices and actions of the future. He decided to give Obadiah a chance, and also give himself a chance to build a more united and stronger League of Heroes. However, peace did not last long. Just as they were preparing to rebuild their home, a more powerful enemy quietly rose up, a mysterious organization calling itself Sons of Shadow. They claimed to inherit the legacy of the Shadow Council and continue to subvert the world order. Faced with new challenges, Tony and his teammates gathered again. They not only had to fight against the enemy, but also had to face internal differences and contradictions. The captain of Magnesium insisted on using traditional justice and courage to defeat evil, while Tony advocated using technology and innovation to solve problems. The dispute between the two put the team into an unprecedented crisis. We can't just rely on the past, Tony. There was a hint of dissatisfaction in the voice of the captain of Magnesium. Technology may bring greater disasters. But without technology, we may not even win this time. Tony retorted, his eyes full of determination. We must find a balance between technology and justice. Just when the team was about to fall apart, an unexpected turn of events occurred. Obadiah Stan used his wisdom to develop a device that could neutralize the special ability of Shadow Sun. His move not only saved the team, but also made Tony and Captain Magnesium realize that true strength comes from unity and trust. In the end, under the leadership of Tony, the team worked together, used technology and wisdom, successfully defeated Shadow Sun, and once again protected world peace. This victory not only made Tony is more convinced of the importance of teamwork, and it also makes him understand the true meaning of a hero, not only possessing extraordinary strength and wisdom, but also having a heart that is willing to protect and save the world at all costs. Zhongbin walked out of the restaurant. The lights of Hell's Kitchen were dim in the night, and the streets under the neon lights were full of noise and vitality. He took a deep breath, feeling the coolness of the night, and his heart was full of expectations. He knew that tonight, he would start to implement his social plan to expand his network and pave the way for his future. He first came to the police station and found Police Officer A. Police Officer A was a young policeman who was impressed by Zhang Bin's good deeds in Hell's Kitchen. The two sat down and talked about what happened recently, from the security of Hell's Kitchen to their respective dreams and pursuits. Zhang Bin won the trust of Police Officer A with his sincerity and wisdom, and the two soon became friends. Zhang Bin, you are really different. Police Officer A looked at him and said, in this chaotic place, you can maintain your principles, which is really rare. Zhao, Zhang Bin smiled, knowing that his actions have been recognized. He patted Police Officer A on the shoulder. We all have the responsibility to make this world a better place, don't we? Afterwards, Zhang Bin visited the residential area of Hell's Kitchen and talked cordially with the residents to understand their lives and needs. He proved with his actions that he is not only a restaurant owner, but also a person who is willing to contribute to the community. His actions not only won the respect and trust of the residents, but also allowed him to gradually build his own network of contacts. However, just as Zhang Bin's social plan was going smoothly, an unexpected incident broke the peace. A fire broke out in a bar in Hell's Kitchen, and the fire spread rapidly, threatening the safety of the surrounding residents. After Zhang Bin learned the news, he immediately organized a rescue team and rushed into the sea of fire with the police officers. In the sea of fire, Zhang Bin showed extraordinary courage and wisdom. He not only successfully rescued the trapped residents, but also assisted the police officers in controlling the fire. His actions not only won the respect and trust of more people, but also made his relationship with the police officers closer. Zheng Bin, you are really our hero. Police Officer B said to him after the rescue. You not only saved people, but also saved our hearts. Zheng Bin looked at Police Officer B, and a warm current surged in his heart. He knew that these newly established friendships and trust would become precious assets on his future path. He smiled and nodded. We all have the responsibility to protect this world, don't we? In the night, Zheng Bin returned to the restaurant with full gains and expectations. He knew that his social plan had achieved initial success, but this was just the beginning. He was determined to continue working hard to expand his network, make more friends, and pave the way for his future. At the same time, he was more convinced that real power comes from the connection and trust between people. Zheng Bin leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers unconsciously on the table, his eyes wandering. The small office he was in was located in a corner of the Hell's Kitchen police station. The walls were mottled, and the air was filled with the smell of stale tobacco and the sourness of coffee. Zheng Bin sighed and muttered to himself, How can I add friends quickly? I can't really be a star or a superhero, right? Ding. System prompt. Friend adding rule updated. Both parties must meet in person to establish a friend relationship. Passive adding conditions are much more difficult than active adding. It is recommended that the host actively add friends. Zheng Bin sat up straight suddenly, as if he had heard some incredible news. What? You have to meet in person? It's so difficult to increase friend points these days. He thought and called up the system interface. Well, my current friend points. Current friend points, 227. Zheng Bin stared at the number and calculated quickly in his mind. 227 points could be exchanged for 2 family points. But let's save some more. 10 consecutive draws are more reliable than a single draw to get a miracle. He shook his head, thinking that he originally just wanted to improve the working conditions of the Hell's Kitchen police station, but he didn't expect to get such a generous reward. I didn't expect that the people here are not so heartless. At the moment, the door of the office was pushed open, and Natasha Romanoff and Hawkeye walked in a hurry. Behind them followed Agent Phil Coulson, with a serious expression. Zheng, hurry up. There's an emergency. Natasha Romanoff said as she walked quickly forward, pulled Zheng Bin, and walked out. Zheng Bin was confused, but he quickly cleaned up the table and followed. What happened? We just came back from mission site. Nick Fury is waiting for us in the Trident building. Agent Phil Coulson explained in a low and hurried voice. The 3 of them quickly crossed the corridor and took the elevator, all in silence. When the elevator door opened, they were already standing in the lobby of the Trident building. The lobby was bustling with people. Agents were busy shuttling back and forth, and the atmosphere was tense and depressing. Phil Coulson led Natasha Romanoff and Hawkeye straight to a conference room, with 2 fully armed guards standing at the door. When they saw Phil Coulson, they immediately saluted and opened the door. In the room, Nick Fury was standing in front of huge amounts of French windows. His back looked particularly solemn. Hearing the sound of the door opening, he slowly turned around. His eyes were like torches. Sit down. His low voice echoed in the room. The 3 of them sat down one by one, and Zheng Bin sat next to Natasha Romanoff, feeling very nervous. Nick Fury's eyes swept across their faces and finally stopped at Zheng Bin. Zheng, you have performed very well in Hell's Kitchen recently. We have received intelligence that an unknown force is infiltrating this area, and we need your cooperation. Nick, Fury said straight to the point. Zheng Bin was stunned for a moment, not expecting things to be so serious. Nick, what should we do? We need you to continue to be active in Hell's Kitchen and collect more intelligence about this force. At the same time, Natasha Romanoff and Hawkeye will cooperate with you to ensure your safety. Zheng Bin nodded, but felt an inexplicable pressure in his heart. Understand, I will do my best. Agent Phil Coulson interrupted at this time. I have arranged for the agents to do a comprehensive inspection to ensure that we have no internal ghosts. Nick Fury nodded with satisfaction. Okay, we can't take it lightly. Zhang, if you need anything, tell Phil Coulson directly. We will fully support you. After the meeting, Zhang walked out of the meeting room and took a deep breath. He knew that the next task would be extremely difficult, but he had no reason to back down. Hey, Zhang, what are you thinking about? Natasha Romanoff's voice came from his side. Zhengbin came back to his senses and smiled. Nothing. I just feel the burden on my shoulders is heavier. Natasha Romanoff patted his shoulder and smiled. Don't worry. Look at us. Zhengbin looked into her eyes, and a warm current surged in his heart. Yes, with you here, we're not afraid of any difficulties. The three walked side by side to the elevator, ready to face unknown challenges. The elevator door slowly closed, isolating them from the noise outside, as if foreshadowing that a new adventure is about to begin. The night wind was howling, and the night sky of New York was shrouded in thick clouds. The dim light made the streets look particularly gloomy. In a conference room on the top floor of the SHILD headquarters building, the atmosphere was even more depressing than the weather outside. Nick Fury stood in front of the huge amounts of French windows, his eyes deep, as if he wanted to penetrate the endless darkness. Phil Coulson walked in with fatigue and a trace of guilt, followed by Hawkeye, who also looked solemn. The footsteps of the two echoed in the empty corridor, as if foreshadowing the inevitable conflict that followed. Director, we are back. Phil Coulson stood still, his voice low but firm. Nick Fury slowly turned around, his eyes sharp, staring directly at Phil Coulson. Sit down, I have something to say. After the two sat down, Nick Fury got straight to the point. The mission failed. What happened? Phil Coulson took a deep breath and took the responsibility on himself without hesitation. Director, the responsibility for the failure of this mission is mine. I underestimated the strength of Zhang Bin and his gang. They are much more difficult to deal with than we thought. Hawkeye frowned and frankly admitted his mistake. Phil Coulson, you are right, but I am more responsible. Because I underestimated the enemy, I didn't go all out. We were unable to respond in time. Please give me flowers. Phil Coulson immediately retorted. No, Clint, this is not your fault. We didn't have enough intelligence in advance, which led to misjudgment. Enough! Nick Fury suddenly shouted, interrupting their argument. The two of them fell silent at the same time, and the air in the conference room seemed to freeze. Nick Fury walked in front of them and swept his eyes across their faces. The responsibility for the failure of the mission lies with me. I underestimated Zhang Bin and his gang. Now is not the time to shirk responsibility. We need to reinvestigate them. Point 11. He paused, and his tone became solemn. Kane has super ability. What's going on? Did the intelligence department not warn in advance? Or did Kane just awakening ability? Natasha Romanoff walked out from the corner, her voice with a hint of worry. If Kane has just awakening ability, then the strength of Zhang Bin and his gang may exceed our expectations. We must prepare for the worst. Phil Coulson frowned, obviously still digesting this information. Director, I don't understand why Kane's awakening ability would cause such a serious problem. Don't we have a special analysis team? We can deal with it by analyzing his ability. Nick Fury shook his head, with a hint of helplessness in his tone. Phil Coulson, things are not that simple. Kane's ability may be much more complicated than we thought, and Zhang Bin and his gang have hidden too many secrets. We can't take it lightly anymore. Hawkeye clenched his fists, and a hint of determination flashed in his eyes. Then what should we do? Regroup the team and attack again? Nick Fury nodded. Yes, but this time we have to be fully prepared. The intelligence department will reevaluate all members of the 427 Zhang Bin group, especially Kane. We need the most accurate intelligence and the strongest combat effectiveness. Phil Coulson stood up, looking serious. Understood, Director. I will be personally responsible for this operation to ensure that no mistakes will be made. Nick Fury patted him on the shoulder, with a subtle concern in his tone. Phil Coulson, I know you are under a lot of pressure, but we must succeed this time. The safety of SHILD and the entire world depends on it. Hawkeye also stood up, with a firm light in his eyes. Phil Coulson, we will fight side by side, and we will never fail again this time. The atmosphere in the conference room was still solemn, but there was a hint of determination and hope. Nick Fury looked at them and prayed silently in his heart, hoping that this time they could successfully uncover the secrets of Zhang Bin and his gang and protect the peace of the world. The night wind was still howling, but in this building, a group of fearless warriors were ready to face the storm. In the dim strategic room, only a few beams of cold light shone in from the vents above the head and reflected on the metal table. There was a repressive atmosphere in the air, as if the whole room was waiting for something to break out. Natasha Romanoff sat at the table, her long legs crossed, but her face showed no emotional fluctuations. She spoke slowly, her voice low but with a hint of imperceptible tension. According to the intelligence we have, there are several people who were originally ordinary citizens, but in less than a month of contact with Zhang Bin, they became mutants. Her eyes swept across everyone present, as if to emphasize the seriousness of this fact. Nick Fury sat at the other end of the table, his single eye slightly narrowed, his eyes blazing. Not only that, he took over the conversation, his voice low and hoarse. Zhang Bin and the brother and sister next to him were not mutants at first. He paused, letting the weight of this sentence completely weigh on everyone's heart. What does this mean? He may have mastered some way to open super abilities. The room was silent for a moment, as if everyone was digesting this amazing speculation. Phil Coulson's face turned pale, and his fingers tapped the edge of the folder unconsciously. If this is true, to what extent will his power expand? He murmured, with obvious worry in his tone. Nick Fury nodded and continued. If a force can master or create a large number of mutants, then they have the ability to destroy a country. There was a hint of coldness in his voice. And Zhang Bin may be such a threat. Natasha Romanoff frowned, obviously not satisfied with this speculation. We can't draw conclusions based on speculation alone, Fury. We need more evidence. Her tone was firm, but not without caution. I agree. Fury nodded. However, according to the existing intelligence, Zhang Bin's background may be more complicated and dangerous than we thought before. His single eye flashed with a sharp light. We must conduct a comprehensive investigation to find out the true face of him and the forces behind him. Phil Coulson sighed and frowned. The problem is that we just promised not to enter Zhang Bin's territory, and you know that Hell's Kitchen is extremely xenophobic to outsiders. He looked at Fury, his face full of helplessness. How can we arrange for agents to go in and investigate? The atmosphere in the room suddenly became solemn, and everyone was thinking about possible solutions. Natasha Romanoff's fingers tapped lightly on the table, making a slight sound, as if to match the rhythm of this silent game. We need a breakthrough. Fury's voice broke the silence. An opportunity for us to infiltrate quietly. His eyes swept across everyone's faces and finally landed on Natasha Romanoff. Nada, do you have any ideas? Natasha Romanoff was slightly stunned, then smiled. You know, I always have a few plans in my pocket. She blinked, with a hint of playfulness in her tone. But this time, we may need to take a risk. Tell me. Fury raised his eyebrows, obviously interested in her plan. Natasha Romanoff straightened up, and her expression became serious. We could take advantage of Zhang Bin's confidence. He thinks his territory is impregnable and would never think that someone would dare to pull teeth from the tiger's mouth. She paused, her eyes 24 firm. We can arrange a fake identity. Let me approach him as a mutant and gain his trust. Phil Coulson's eyes widened, obviously shocked by this bold plan. This is too dangerous, Natasha Romanoff. If he finds out your identity, I know the risks. Natasha Romanoff interrupted him with an unquestionable determination in her tone. But this is our best chance at the moment. We don't have time for hesitation. Fury pondered for a moment and finally nodded. Okay, let's do it. We need to act as soon as possible and can't delay any longer. He looked at Natasha Romanoff with trust in his eyes. What support do you need for people? Natasha Romanoff smiled slightly, with a confident light in her eyes. Give me a week. If I don't get any news back, you will implement Plan B. Got it. Fury nodded, with a firm light flashing in his one eye. Everyone get ready. This battle has just begun. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became tense, and everyone began to prepare for the upcoming action. Natasha Romanoff stood up, patted her clothes lightly, and her eyes showed an unyielding will. She knew that this would be a life-and-death contest, and she would never back down. The night was as dark as ink, with thick clouds hanging low, and the neon lights of the Big Apple reflected colorful light and shadows on the streets after the rain. Nick Fury stood in the secret base of S.H.I.E.L.D., frowning and looking like a torch. The air in the room seemed to become heavy because of his silence. "Director, are we really going to do this?" Agent Phil Coulson stood opposite Fury, looking serious. He knew that every time Fury made such a decision, it meant that a difficult task was about to begin. Fury turned around slowly and looked directly at Phil Coulson. "We have no choice. Before we get more intelligence, we can only monitor. Remember, no active contact and no conflict." Phil Coulson nodded, knowing that Fury's decision was a done deal. But he was still a little uneasy. "The target is Tony Stark." Fury interrupted him, his voice low and powerful. "He is the key. We must keep an eye on him. Any slight movement must be reported immediately." Phil Coulson took a deep breath. He knew the difficulty and importance of this task. "I understand, Director. Keep an eye on the target for 24 hours. Collect intelligence. Don't get close. Don't contact 50. Fury nodded slightly. "You go and prepare, and leave immediately." Phil Coulson said no more, turned and left the room, and disappeared at the end of the corridor. Fury looked at his back, and a trace of imperceptible worry flashed in his eyes. A week later, the night once again enveloped the Big Apple City. Jung Bin drove a jeep and sped on the road leading to Stark Manor. His mood was a bit complicated. After all, he was going to meet Tony Stark, the man who was famous for his genius and wealth. Starting from Hell's Kitchen, after nearly 3 hours of driving, Jung Bin finally saw the outline of Stark Manor. The manor covers a large area and has gorgeous buildings, like a modern castle. Standing in the night, it exudes an inviolable majesty. Jung Bin parked his car in the open-air parking lot of the manor. After getting out of the car, he couldn't help but look around. The parking lot was full of luxury cars, each of which was worth a lot of money. His Jeep looked particularly abrupt in front of these luxury cars. "Mr. Jung, welcome to Stark Manor." A low and powerful voice interrupted his thoughts. Jung Bin looked back and saw that it was Happy, the driver and bodyguard of Stark Manor. "Happy, long time no see." Jung Bin greeted with a smile. Happy nodded, with a serious expression. "Tony is busy in the basement. I'll take you there." Jung Bin nodded, followed Happy, and walked into the manor. Along the way, he couldn't help looking around, and the luxurious decorations and advanced technology in the manor made him dazzled. "What is Tony busy with recently?" Jung Bin asked tentatively. Happy shrugged. "What else can he be busy with? He's been working on his inventions in the lab all day long." Jung Bin smiled. He knew that Tony Stark was obsessed with technology to the point where he almost forgot to eat and sleep. The two walked all the way through the gorgeous hall and long corridors, and finally came to the basement. The entrance to the basement was heavily guarded, showing the importance of this place. "Tony, someone is looking for you," Happy said to the intercom. Tony Stark's impatient voice came from the intercom. "Who is it again? Didn't I tell you not to disturb me?" Happy glanced at Jung Bin and said calmly, "It's Jung Bin. He came from Hell's Kitchen." The intercom was silent for a moment, and then Tony's surprised voice came. "Why? Why is he here? Let him in." Happy nodded and motioned Jung Bin to follow him in. Pushing open the heavy metal door, Jung Bin walked into Tony's laboratory. The laboratory was full of various high-tech equipment and unfinished inventions, and the air was filled with a faint smell of motor oil. Tony Stark was standing in front of the workbench, holding a newly assembled mechanical arm in his hand, with a focused expression. Hearing the footsteps, he looked up and saw Jung Bin, with a surprised smile on his face. "Jung, long time no see. Why are you here?" Jung Bin smiled. "Come to see you, and by the way, I want to talk to you about something." Tony put down the mechanical arm in his hand and patted the oil on his hands. Then sit down and talk, I just need a break. The two sat down in a corner of the laboratory, and Tony's expression became serious. Tell me, what's the matter? Zhang Bin took a deep breath. He knew that the following conversation might change a lot of things. It's about S.H.I.E.L.D. Tony's eyebrows raised slightly. S.H.I.E.L.D.? What do they want to do? Zhang Bin looked around and lowered his voice. They are targeting you. Tony was stunned for a moment, then showed a disdainful smile. Targeted? They are quite discerning. Zhang Bin knew that Tony was always confident, but he still said seriously, this time is different. They sent Phil Coulson agent to monitor you 24 hours a day and collect intelligence. Tony was silent for a moment, then laughed. Phil Coulson? He is quite dedicated. But what do they want from me? Zhang Bin shook his head. I don't know, but you have to be careful. They won't target you for no reason. Tony nodded. His expression became serious. Okay, I will be careful. But if they dare to come to make trouble, I will not be polite. Zhang Bin smiled. He knew that Tony Stark was never a person who gave up easily. That's good. Contact me anytime if you have anything. Tony patted his shoulder. Okay, don't worry, I will. You take a rest first. I'll go finish the experiment. Zhang Bin nodded. Watching Tony return to work, he knew that this night was destined not to be peaceful. The morning sun shines through the dense treetops and sprinkles on the winding path. Zhang Bin sits in the back seat of a black car, looking at the Stark Manor outside through the car window. Surrounded by green trees, the air is filled with a faint scent of grass. In the distance, the surface of the swimming pool sparkled in the sun, and the white lines on the tennis court were clearly visible, as if waiting for a fierce duel at any time. Wow, such a big place. Doesn't it feel empty to live alone? Zhang Bin said to himself, but he couldn't help but feel a little envious. He thought of his current savings, and then looked at this mansion, thinking whether he should also buy himself a similar villa to enjoy this luxurious life. But this idea was quickly dispelled by him. Well, forget it. I'm living well on rent now, and besides, the land tax for such a big villa is not a joke. Zhang Bin shook his head lightly, seeming to feel a little amused by his momentary impulse. The car slowly stopped, and Zhang Bin's eyes fell on his old car that he had been driving for many years. It's time to change this car, he thought to himself. I have feelings for the car my father left me, but it's old after all. At this time, Happy came over from the direction of the villa and motioned Zhang Bin to follow him. Zhang Bin straightened his clothes and followed Happy to the villa. Along the way, he felt a little complicated with some expectations and some uneasiness. When he arrived at the door of the villa, Tony Stark was already standing there, with his hands open and his signature confident smile on his face. Welcome to the Stark Manor, man, he said enthusiastically, as if he was welcoming an old friend who had been reunited after a long absence. Zhang Bin was slightly stunned, then smiled and teased. Such a big place, Tony. You live here alone. Don't you feel lonely? Tony Stark shrugged, and the corners of his mouth raised a slightly teasing arc. I am Tony Stark, a world-renowned rich man, and it is definitely natural to live in such a manner. Loneliness? Not there, man. Zhang Bin listened to Tony's confident answer and felt speechless. This guy really feels good about himself, he thought, but at the same time he also realized that the agreed salary might not be enough. Well, it seems that I have to reconsider our agreement. Zhang Bin decided secretly in his heart, but still kept a smile on his face. Tony, since you are here, let's talk about the details of the cooperation. Tony Stark nodded slightly and made a gesture of invitation. Definitely, man. Please come in. We will drink and talk. The two walked into the villa. The spacious hall was filled with various high-tech equipment and artworks. Zhang Bin looked around while walking and couldn't help sighing in his heart. This place is simply a perfect combination of technology and art. Tony, you really opened my eyes here. Zhang Bin praised sincerely. Thanks, man. Everything here is my hard work. Tony Stark said proudly, but now I need your help. Let's create more miracles together. Zhang Bin smiled slightly, and the fighting spirit in his heart was completely ignited. Okay, Tony, let's create a miracle together. The two sat down in the living room, and the servant brought 2 glasses of red wine. Tony Stark raised his glass and gestured to Jung Bin. "Cheers to our cooperation." "Cheers," Jung Bin responded, his heart full of expectations and determination. The sound of the glasses colliding echoed in the spacious hall, and the conversation between the two officially began at this moment. Jung Bin knew that this would be an extraordinary beginning, and he was ready to meet all challenges. As the night fell, the Manhattan skyline flickered charmingly in the distance. In Stark's villa, the lights were warm and soft, and the flames in the fireplace danced gently, reflecting on everyone's face. Jung Bin sat on the soft leather sofa, frowning slightly, and his eyes occasionally glanced at Tony Stark, standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. "Tony, seriously, you have to consider letting Pepper and Ethan move in, or you could just rent an apartment and let Ethan accompany you." Jung Bin's tone was relaxed, but with a hint of imperceptible persistence. Sure, Stark did not respond immediately, but just picked up the red wine in his hand and shook it gently, and the red liquid rippled under the light. "Are you sure? It might be a bit crowded for them to move in." He finally spoke, with his usual cynicism in his voice. Jung Bin shrugged. "I'm sure Pepper is your right-hand man, and Ethan also needs a safe environment. Besides, don't you think it's too quiet here?" Stark raised his eyebrows, as if he was interested in what Jung Bin said. He turned and walked to the wine cabinet, took out a bottle of red wine, poured half a glass, and pushed it in front of Jung Bin. "Some red wine? This is a good year," Stark suggested, with a hint of teasing in his eyes. Jung Bin waved his hand and refused with a smile. "Thanks, Tony, I don't drink. Just give me a can of Coke." Stark was stunned for a moment, obviously not expecting Jung Bin to refuse his red wine. "Coke? Do you really know what you are refusing?" He teased, but still turned to Happy and ordered, "Happy, go buy him a can of Coke." Happy responded and turned to leave the room. Stark sat opposite Jung Bin, crossed his hands on his knees, staring at Jung Bin with burning eyes. "This is your reward for reminding me last time. I hope you're satisfied." Jung Bin picked up the Coke, opened the pull ring, took a big sip, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. "Tony, your reward is a bit shabby," he complained. "Do you know how many tasks I have delayed because of your undercover secretary?" Stark raised his eyebrows, obviously interested in what Jung Bin said. "Undercover secretary? You mean Natasha Romanoff? I have investigated and found several commercial spies. I didn't expect them to infiltrate so deeply." There was a hint of complacency in his tone. Jung Bin shrugged. "Yeah, but do you know what I found? A clue about the kidnapping conspiracy." As soon as he finished speaking, Stark's face changed, and the originally relaxed expression was instantly replaced by a heavy one. "Kidnapping conspiracy? Tell me, what's going on?" Stark asked eagerly, leaning forward, almost standing up from the sofa. Zheng Qi took another sip of Coke slowly, and then slowly said, "Tony, you're the famous Iron Man, but in a month, you didn't find out the mastermind behind the kidnapping plot. Is it that you can't find it out, or you don't want to find it at all?" Sure, Stark's face suddenly darkened, and a complex emotion flashed in his eyes. He took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. "Zhengdu, don't talk to me in that tone. You know how much I value these things. Tell me, what did you find?" Zhang Bin looked at Sure Stark with a trace of scrutiny in his eyes. "Tony, you have to understand that sometimes you're too focused on your own world and tend to ignore some obvious things. The mastermind behind the kidnapping conspiracy may be right next to you." Sure Stark was silent for a moment, then smiled bitterly. "Are you talking about Natasha Romanoff? Or someone else?" He asked in a low voice, with a hint of self-mockery in his tone. "Seeking flowers?" Zhang Bin did not answer directly, but stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the night in the distance. "Tony, think about it yourself. Who can do so many things under your nose? Who can get the most benefit from you?" Stark fell into deep thought, and the only sound in the room was the slight crackling of the fire in the fireplace. He understood that although Zhang Bin's words were harsh, they were not without reason. He needed to re-examine the people around him and find the enemy hiding in the dark. "I will find out." Stark finally spoke, his voice firm and powerful. He stood up, walked to Jung Bin and patted him on the shoulder. "Thank you, Jung Bin. I will handle it myself this time." Jung Bin smiled and patted Stark on the shoulder. "Tony, I believe you. But don't forget that sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction." The two looked at each other for a moment and nodded in tacit understanding. The night was dark, but in this villa, a new battle was about to begin. Tony Stark sat in the dim studio, the light above his head hitting the metal table, reflecting a cold luster. His eyes were originally the usual confidence and disdain until Jung Bin's words were like a sharp knife, directly hitting his heart. "What did you say?" Tony's voice was low, with a slight tremor that he himself didn't even notice. Jung Bin didn't avoid it. Looking directly at Tony, his eyes were so firm that it was frightening. "If one day you are gone, who will be the biggest beneficiary, Tony? Don't you think this question is worth thinking about?" Tony frowned, and his breathing became a little faster. His brain was working fast, trying to keep these words out of his mind. But Jung Bin's words were like a venomous snake, which had already drilled into his head and began to 420 gnaw at his nerves. "Obadiah," Tony muttered to himself, and when this name came out of his mouth, it seemed to carry 1,000 pounds of weight. He couldn't believe that he would actually connect this famous minister with a murderer behind the scenes. "Are you crazy? He is my father's best friend." Tony's voice began to be unstable, and even he could hear the shake in it. Jung Bin didn't interrupt him, but just looked at Tony quietly, waiting for him to finish his words. He knew that at this time, Tony didn't need more verbal stimulation, but a process of sorting out his thoughts. Tony's memory was suddenly pulled back to his childhood. At that time, Obadiah was like a second father, taking him to the amusement park, buying him ice cream, and teaching him how to play baseball. Every time Howard was busy at work, Obadiah was by his side. Those warm pictures now seemed like irony, stinging Tony's eyes. "No, impossible." Tony's voice seemed to be squeezed out from the depths of his throat with a hint of despair. His hands trembled involuntarily, and although he tried to hold them down with his other hand, the slight tremor still exposed his inner fluctuations. Jung Bin finally spoke. His voice was calm and direct. "Tony, you are a smart man, and smart people should face the facts. Obadiah is staying. He is Howard Stark's best friend and your business partner. But don't forget, he is also the second in command of Stark Industries, and he has always wanted more power, and more wealth." Tony's breathing became rapid, his fists clenched, and his nails almost dug into the flesh. He couldn't accept that his Uncle Yu, who had given him countless love and guidance, had such a vicious intention towards him. "Do you have evidence?" Tony finally raised his head and looked directly into Jung Bin's eyes, with a desperate hope in his eyes. Jung Bin did not avoid Tony's gaze. His eyes were still firm. "There is no direct evidence at present, but I can tell you where the evidence is. You go check it. Tony, check it yourself." Tony's heart sank suddenly. He knew that Jung Bin would not say this for no reason. His brain worked quickly and began to analyze Jung Bin's words. He needed evidence, and needed to find the evidence that could prove or overturn all this. "Where is it?" Tony's voice was low and rapid, like a volcano about to erupt. Jung Bin turned slightly and pointed to an old computer in the corner of the studio. "There are communication records between your father and Obadiah in that computer. Go and see it and judge for yourself." Tony's eyes suddenly became sharp. He walked quickly to the computer, and his fingers tapped quickly on the keyboard. The codes and file names jumping on the screen were like tortures of his heart. His heart beat fast, and his hands trembled involuntarily. But he forced himself to calm down and began to read the files carefully. Time seemed to freeze at this moment. Tony's world was left with only the screen and the dazzling words on the screen. His eyes became empty, as if he had lost his soul. Those once warm memories now seemed like an elaborate scam that trapped him in it and warmed himself. Tony took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. He knew that now was not the time to collapse. He needed evidence and the truth. He continued to flip through the files, and every word pierced his heart like a needle. But he couldn't stop. He had to find the answer. Finally, his eyes stopped on an email. It was an email from Obadiah. The content was brief and direct, but it was enough to make Tony's heart sink to the bottom. "Tony, go and check it yourself." Zhongbin's voice sounded behind him, like the final verdict. Tony didn't look back. His eyes were empty and lifeless, but his heart seemed to have set off a huge wave. He finally understood that those details that he had ignored and those seemingly unintentional actions were all a carefully planned conspiracy. His hands were still shaking, but he knew that he had to face this cruel reality. Because he, Tony Stark, would never let anyone, even his uncle, escape the judgment of justice. The night was as dark as ink, and the lights were dim in the office on the top floor of Stark Industrial Building, and there was a depressing atmosphere in the air. Tony Stark sat behind his desk, his face pale and his eyes full of bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't closed his eyes for a few days, and he was in deep confusion and pain. His hands were crossed together, and his fingers kept rubbing, showing his inner anxiety and uneasiness. Zhongbin pushed the door open and saw Tony's appearance, and his heart sank. He originally planned to make a joke to ease the atmosphere, but at this moment he felt that his throat was like something. "Tony, I brought the evidence you wanted," Zhongbin said, putting a USB flash drive on the table. Tony raised his head, and a glimmer of hope flashed in his eyes, but then it was replaced by pain and doubt. "Zhong, I really don't know how to thank you. $1 million US. This is what you deserve." His voice was hoarse and a little tired. Zhongbin grinned, trying to make the atmosphere more relaxed. $1 million US? "Tony, you are too stingy. You forgot that Obadiah is your uncle, and your loved ones have to pay more." Tony smiled bitterly, but soon his expression became serious. "Zhong, I really appreciate you. But seeing how I am now, do you really have the heart to take this money?" Zhongbin was stunned for a moment, and then sighed. "Okay, Tony, it's free this time. But you have to promise me that you won't be so depressed anymore." Tony nodded, his expression solemn. "Tell me what the evidence is." Zhongbin walked to the table and looked directly into Tony's eyes. "The evidence is in Obadiah Stanny's office computer. There is a video recording his conversation with the leader of the armed group who kidnapped you." Tony's eyes widened, full of shock and anger. "Obadiah, he actually—" "Yes." Zhongbin nodded, his tone heavy. "Moreover, the force that kidnapped you is 10 Rings, an organization with a century-old history. Their leader is Mandarin. Tony, this organization is not something you can deal with at the moment." Tony's hands tightly grasped the edge of the table, his knuckles whitening from the force. "Obadiah, what has he been doing behind my back?" Zhongbin took a deep breath and said slowly, "He has been selling arms to various armed forces, including the 10 Rings. Because he wants to monopolize Stark Industries, he is dissatisfied with you." Tony's eyes turned cold, and a flame of anger ignited in his heart. "This be asterisk, 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 D." Zhongbin patted Tony 830's shoulder, trying to give him some comfort. "Tony, you have to be careful of your uncle. He is much more dangerous than you think." Tony lowered his head and was silent for a moment, then raised his head, and his eyes rekindled determination. "I won't let him succeed. I still have Happy, Pepper, and you friends to agree." Zhongbin smiled and nodded. "That's right, Tony. We will all support you. If you have anything, you can call me at any time. Because we are friends." Tony held Zhongbin's hand tightly, his voice hoarse but firm. "Thank you, Zhong. Really, thank you." Zhongbin smiled and patted Tony's face. "You're welcome, Tony. Remember, you're not alone. We are all by your side." After saying that, Zhongbin turned and left, leaving Tony alone in the office. Tony looked at the USB flash drive on the table, his eyes flashing with determination. He knew that the road ahead was full of thorns, but he was ready to face everything. The night wind blew in from the window, bringing a breath of fresh air. Tony took a deep breath, and the haze in his heart seemed to dissipate a little. He picked up the USB flash drive and put it into the computer interface, and the screen began to play the video that determined his fate. Zhongbin stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of the Stark Industrial Building. Through the glass, he saw Tony Stark sitting at the bar, holding a bottle of whiskey that had long been emptied in his hand. The lights in the room were dim, and the only light source came from a swaying chandelier, which was reflected in Tony's bloodshot eyes, like two flames that were about to go out. Zhang Bin sighed. He could understand this feeling. After all, being betrayed by the person you trust the most is not something that everyone can bear. He took 2 steps closer, stopped again, and his eyes stayed on Stark for a few seconds. He knew that people like Tony didn't need comfort, but solitude. Comforting words were nothing more than scratching the surface. Only he could really help him get out of this situation. "Hey, Tony." Zhang Bin's voice was not loud, but it was loud enough for Stark to hear. Tony raised his head, his eyes blurred, and he had obviously drunk a lot. "Oh, it's you, Zhang." Tony pulled the corners of his mouth and showed a smile that was uglier than crying. "Why? Are you here to see me laugh?" Zhang Bin shook his head and showed a bitter smile on his face. "Joke? No. Tony, I just came to see you and give you a piece of advice." Tony narrowed his eyes and seemed a little confused. "Advice? Ha, do I, Tony Stark, need others to give me advice?" Zhang Bin ignored his sarcasm and said directly, "Some things, no matter how much others say, it's useless. You have to figure it out yourself. What you need now is not wine, nor sympathy, but time. Give yourself some time, and everything will be fine." Tony was silent for a moment, then smiled bitterly. "You're right, Zhang. But sometimes time is not the best antidote." Zhang Bin nodded, knowing that Tony Stark would survive because he was destined to become Iron Man. He patted Tony on the shoulder and left a meaningful sentence. "See you next time. You will be different." After saying that, Zhang Bin turned and left, leaving Tony with a lonely back. He understood that at this time, any extra comfort would be hypocritical. After walking out of the building, Zhang Bin exhaled and looked up at the sky. Today is a special day, and he deliberately put on that Zhongshan suit, which made him look particularly serious. He knew that he would look very different from his usual sloppy appearance today. "Hey, Zhang, are you going to attend an important meeting?" Deadpool's voice suddenly came from the side, interrupting his thoughts. Zhang Bin turned his head and saw that Deadpool was not wearing his iconic black and red tights today, but a casual outfit, revealing his severely burned face. That face, as if it had experienced the flames of hell, was unbearable to look at. "Oh, Wade, why are you fine today?" Zhang Bin asked in surprise. Deadpool shrugged and smiled indifferently. "Hey, today is a special day. I have to respect it. Besides, my face is like this. Why am I wearing Zhao Does tights?" Zhang Bin knew that Deadpool's face was because he participated in Project X and implanted regeneration ability to fight cancer. The regeneration ability and cancer formed a dynamic balance in his body, causing his appearance to remain severely burned. This is why Deadpool is the most shameless person in the Marvel Universe, because he has no face at all. "Okay, Wade, today is indeed a special day. Come with me to see it. The renovation of the community college is completed, which is a big deal," Zhang Bin said with a smile. Deadpool blinked his cunning eyes and teased. "Oh, Zhang, are you inviting me? It's rare. Well, for your sake, I'll accompany you." The two chatted and laughed all the way and soon arrived at Hell's Kitchen. This place was originally a dilapidated place, but today is brand new. The community college, sponsored by Zhang Bin, has been renovated and has become brand new, as if it has been revitalized. "Wow, Zhang, it looks great here." Deadpool couldn't help but admire. Zhang Bin nodded, with a proud smile on his face. "Yeah, this used to be the worst place in Hell's Kitchen, but now it has become a hopeful place." The two stood at the entrance of the college, watching the children coming in and out, their faces filled with happiness and hope. At this moment, Zhang Bin felt extremely relieved in his heart, and he knew that it was all worth it. Deadpool patted Zhang Bin on the shoulder, and 590 smiled and said, "Hey, Zhang, you did a great thing. It seems that today is indeed a special day." And Zhang Bin smiled and said nothing more. He just stood there quietly, feeling this rare tranquility and satisfaction. He knew that everything today was just a beginning, and there was still a long way to go in the future, but he was ready to face more challenges. Deadpool slumped on the sofa like a puddle of mud, holding a can of beer that was almost empty in his hand. The TV was playing a boring variety show, but his eyes were half closed and listless. His hair was messy, and his face was full of the four words, "No hope in life." "Belinda dumped me again," Deadpool hummed weakly, his tone full of self-pity. Zhang Bin was sitting on the chair opposite, looking down at his mobile phone, and heard Deadpool complain without even lifting his eyelids. "Dumped again? How many times has this happened to you? Didn't Belinda agree to get back together with you last month?" "This time is different, brother. This time she's really angry." Deadpool covered his forehead with a painful look. "She said I don't care about her at all. I only care about my beer and TV." Zhongbin finally raised his head and rolled his eyes. "You care more about beer and TV than her. Everyone knows that. I think it's a miracle that Belinda can tolerate you for so long." Deadpool let out a long sigh, as if the whole world owed him. "I don't want to go out today. Brother, go by yourself. I want to reflect on myself here and think about life." Zhongbin shrugged, obviously used to Deadpool's state. "It's up to you, Seft. Anyway, you will be the same after reflecting." He stood up, put on his coat, and prepared to go out. Walking on the familiar streets, Zhongbin's mood was obviously much better than Deadpool. The morning sun shines on the road, giving everything a golden edge. He chooses to walk to the community college and inspect the street he is responsible for. On both sides of the street, vendors have already started a busy day. The stalls selling genuine bags display a variety of fashionable handbags, attracting passersby. The breakfast stalls waft with fragrance, and the smell of fried dough sticks and soy milk makes Zhongbin swallow his saliva. There is also the Huxia vendor, who is warmly greeting customers. The combination of soy milk and fried dough sticks is always a popular choice here. Zhongbin looked at all this and felt relieved. Who would have thought that a year ago this was still a place for gang fights, and chaos and violence were staged almost every night? After his efforts, this street finally became orderly and restored its due peace and prosperity. He stopped, took a deep breath of the morning air, and a sense of comfort arose in his heart. Today, nothing to do. Listen to music in the brothel. He whispered to himself, as if this would make time stop at this moment and enjoy this rare peace. Before he knew it, Zhongbin had already reached the gate of the community college. He immediately saw Jean Bing and his secretary Sharon O'Casey, who always had a blank expression, standing at the gate. Jean Bing was wearing a neat suit with his hands in his pockets and was talking to Sharon in a low voice. Zhongbin smiled, walked up, and decided to say hello first. "Jean Bing, how come you have time to come here in person today? Can't you let Sharon handle this kind of trivial matter?" Zhongbin's tone was teasing, but there was a friendly smile on his face. Jean Bing raised his head and saw Zhongbin, and a smile appeared on his face. "Some things are better to do in person, Zhongbin, don't you think?" Sharon stood behind Jean Bing, still with that cold expression, as if everything in the outside world had nothing to do with her. Zhongbin smiled and nodded. "That's true, but with Sharon by your side, what problems can't be solved?" Jean Bing patted Sharon's shoulder and smiled proudly. "She is indeed capable, but some things still require me to come in person." Zhongbin shrugged to show his understanding. "Well, since you said so, there must be something important." The three stood at the entrance of the college, the sun shining on them, as if time had stopped at this moment. People were coming and going on the street, the vendors' shouts were coming and going, everything seemed so harmonious and peaceful. Zhongbin prayed silently in his heart, hoping that such days could last for a long time, and that his efforts could keep this street peaceful and prosperous forever. He didn't know what the future would be like, but he knew that he would do his best to protect this hard-won peace. Jean Bing seemed to see through Zhang Bin's mind, smiled, and broke the silence. "Let's go in and talk about business." Zhang Bin nodded, followed Jean Bing and Sharon into the community college. He knew that new challenges were waiting for him ahead, but he was ready. No matter what the future holds, he will face it bravely, because he knows that this street and this city need him. The morning sun shone through the thin dew wine in the new campus, and Jean Bing walked into the school gate, followed by his secretary Sharon O'Casey. His expression was as serious as ever. With his hands in his suit pants pockets, he scanned the surroundings with his slightly narrowed eyes. The school had just been renovated, and the air was still filled with a slight smell of paint and new bricks. "Sharon, is this the renovation result you reported?" Jean Bing's voice was low and full of unquestionable majesty. Sharon hurriedly followed, holding a folder in her hand and a professional smile on her face. "Yes, Mr. Jean Bing. The school has been renovated as planned, and all projects have passed the acceptance. Today, I will give you a detailed introduction to each area." Jean Bing nodded slightly, motioning her to continue. Sharon cleared her throat and began to introduce. The school is mainly divided into 3 areas: teaching area, living area, and activity area. First of all, the teaching area includes a teaching building and a library. The teaching building has 3 floors, each with 12 classrooms, a total of 36 classrooms, which can accommodate students from grades 1 to 12, 3 classes in each grade. "Please give me flowers 0. She pointed to the brand new teaching building not far away, the red brick walls gleaming in the sun. The library is located on the north side of the teaching building, with a rich collection of books and a modern electronic reading room." Jean Bing raised his eyebrows, seeming to be quite satisfied with the arrangement. "Continue." Sharon flipped a page of the document and continued. "The living area includes the cafeteria and dormitory building. At present, we have a completed dormitory building with 6 floors and 20 rooms on each floor. Each room is 200 square feet, and the original plan was to accommodate 4 people in each room." Speaking of this, Sharon paused and looked at Jean Bing. "Mr. Zheng, 200 square feet for 4 people. Is the space too small for Jean Jean?" Jean Bing frowned, as if thinking about this question. After a moment, he turned his head to look at Zheng Bin, the person in charge of the school project. "Zheng Bin, what do you think?" Zheng Bin pushed the glasses on his nose and answered without hesitation, then changed it to 3 people per room. Sharon was obviously surprised by this decision, and she slightly widened her eyes. "6 people? Isn't it too crowded?" Zheng Bin smiled, his tone firm and powerful. "Sharon, you may not understand the current situation of Hell's Kitchen. Many children don't even have a place to live. They can only sleep on shabby sofas or even live on the streets. In comparison, 6 people in a room is not crowded." Jean Bing heard this, and the corners of his mouth slightly raised, revealing a smile of approval. "Zheng Bin is right. We are not serving those children who live in high-end 627 apartments. We are providing a home for the children in Hell's Kitchen. Although space is limited, hope is unlimited." Sharon nodded. Although she still had doubts in her heart, she did not raise any more objections. She knew that Jean Bing's decision was well thought out. The group continued to move forward. When passing the cafeteria, Jean Bing stopped. The glass of the dining room was polished to a shine, and the tables and chairs inside were neatly arranged. "Is the capacity of the cafeteria enough?" Jean Bing asked. Sharon immediately replied, "The cafeteria can accommodate 300 people at the same time. We plan to dine in batches, consumer protection, so that every student has enough time to eat." Jean Bing nodded and continued to move forward to the activity area. The basketball court, football field, and running track here have been paved, and there are still morning dew on the lawn. The facilities in the activity area look good. Jean Bing finally showed a satisfied smile. Zheng Bin took the opportunity to add, "We also plan to build an indoor gymnasium here, so that even on rainy days, students have a place to play." Jean Bing stopped and turned to look at Zheng Ji. "Okay, continue to promote this project. We have to make sure every detail is done to the best, so that these children can have a real learning paradise." Sharon followed behind, silently taking note of every detail. She knew that there was still a lot of work to be done, but with Jean Bing's support and Zheng Bin's execution, the project would be successfully completed. The sun gradually rose, and everything on the campus seemed so vibrant. For the children of Hell's Kitchen, this is not just a school, but also a new beginning, a future full of hope. Under the dim light, the shabby bar was filled with the smell of cheap beer. In the corner sat a few middle-aged people with tired faces and empty eyes. This is Hell's Kitchen, a forgotten corner. Jean Bing sat on an old wooden chair, lowered his head slightly, and listened to Zheng Bin's words. His expression was as gloomy as ever, but after hearing Zhang Bin's explanation of the dormitory arrangement, he nodded gently. 6 people in one room? Here, this is not a problem. Jean Bing's low voice was particularly clear in the noise of the bar. It's good enough for these children to have a place to live. Zhang Bin stood next to Jean Bing, with a smile on his face, but his eyes showed some helplessness. Yes, mister. Jean Bing, you know the situation here. However, I think our secretary, Ms. Sharon, should visit the dormitory of Dongfang University. The conditions there, hey, 8 people in 10 rooms are considered good. Sharon stood aside, frowning slightly, trying to interrupt. Mr. Zhang, I understand what you mean, but our school is not a prison after all. Providing a safe learning environment for children is what you have always emphasized. Moreover, we have installed heating. You know, it is not easy to live here in winter. Zhang Bin turned his head and looked at Sharon, with a meaningful arc at the corner of his mouth. Ms. Sharon, you are right. Installing short gas is indeed a wise decision. However, I did not build this university dormitory according to prison standards. 6 people in one room is already considered merciful. 1.4 Sharon nodded, but still insisted on her point of view. In any case, your generosity will be remembered by the children of Hell's Kitchen. They need such opportunities. Zhang Bin smiled and waved his hand. Kindness? Miss Sharon, you think too highly of me. I just do what I can in reality. Air conditioning is too expensive and not cost-effective. In the winter in New York, you know, heating is a necessity. Sharon took a deep breath. She knew that what Zhang Bin said made sense, but she still felt a little reluctant. But Mr. Zhang, what will the children do in the summer? Without air conditioning, how can they survive those hot days? Zhang Bin shrugged his shoulders and showed a helpless smile on his face. Then let them learn to be patient. What we can do is limited, and it is impossible to be perfect. It is not easy to give them a safe place to study. Sharon wanted to say something else, but seeing the firmness on Zhang Bin's face, she had to give up. She knew that Zhang Bin's original intention was just to give these children a place to go to school, but she also hoped to get better conditions for the children. Zhang Bin looked at Sharon and felt a little satisfied. Although the original intention of building a school was just to let the children have books to read, it is also a good thing to have such a good reputation. He turned his head and looked at Jean Bing, nodding slightly. Mr. Jean Bing, what do you think? Jean Bing raised his head. His eyes were like torches, and his voice was low and powerful. You have done enough, Zhang Bin. These children have a place to live and a place to study, which is already their blessing. Fame is just an additional thing. Zhang Bin smiled, and the pressure in his heart was slightly relieved. He knew what Jean Bing's recognition meant. In this cruel world, sometimes 10 o'clock is definitely enough. Sharon stood aside and watched the 2 people talking silently. She knew that reality was always crueler than ideals, but she still hoped to get more warmth and care for these children. The hustle and bustle in the bar was still there, but the conversation between Zhang Bin and Jean Bing made this corner seem particularly quiet. The 2 had their own plans, but their goals were unexpectedly the same, to have a better future for the children of Hell's Kitchen. As the night deepened, the lights in the bar became dimmer, but the flame of hope was quietly ignited in the hearts of the 2. The sun shone through the thin clouds on the brand-new campus. Zhang Bin followed the young and capable secretary and slowly walked through this land full of hope. The stone road under his feet still had a newly paved cold breath, and the green plants on both sides were neatly trimmed, as if foreshadowing a brand new beginning. Mr. Zhang, there are 2 basketball courts here, and students can play at any time. The secretary's voice rang in his ears, accompanied by the crisp, dribbling sound on the basketball court. Zhang Bin stopped and swept his eyes across the flat field, as if he had already seen the students sweating on the field. And here, our boxing gym and shooting hall. The secretary pointed to 2 buildings not far away, the metal walls gleaming in the sun. In the boxing gym, there was a dull sound of hitting, as if injecting an unyielding force into the campus. However, when they walked to the reserved open space, the secretary's face darkened slightly. Mr. Zhang, unfortunately, Due to insufficient area, the American football field could not be built. Zhongbin frowned slightly, but soon relaxed. He knew that it was not easy to have such a campus in the city center. We will find a way to solve it, he said firmly, as if to encourage himself. The secretary nodded, and then mentioned a more difficult problem. Mr. Zheng, we may encounter some troubles in enrollment. Most of the teenagers in Hell's Kitchen provide fresh blood for the gangs. If we recruit them all into the school, the gangs will definitely not agree. Zhongbin's heart sank. He had expected this problem. Hell's Kitchen, that corner shrouded in darkness, where people live in fear and despair, and the gangs are their nightmares that they cannot get rid of. It seems that we need a solution. Zhongbin muttered to himself, and several ideas flashed through his mind. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he thought of a person. Jinbing, Zhongbin said softly, as if this name originally contained some kind of power. I can throw this question to him and see if he has any suggestions. The secretary showed a hint of doubt, but did not ask more. She knew that Zhongbin had his own considerations. That night, Zhongbin met Jinbing in a secret club. The gang leader was sitting leisurely on the sofa, playing with a wine glass in his hand, as if he didn't care about anything. Jinbing, I need your help, Zhongbin said straight to the point. Jinbing raised his head. His eyes were like torches. Zhongbin, you're a rare guest. What brought you here? Those kids in Hell's Kitchen. I want to recruit them into the school, but the gang won't agree. Zhongbin looked directly into Jinbing's eyes, without any reservations. Jinbing was silent for a moment, and then showed a meaningful smile. You want to move the cheese of the gang, which is not easy. I know. So I want to send an invitation letter in my name to call all the gangs to a meeting. Use your influence to make them give me this face, Zhongbin said with a firm tone. Jinbing nodded, but then shook his head. Zhongbin, I can help you gather them and speak for you. But you have to understand that these gangs are unruly. Even if I come forward, they may not fully accept my proposal. Zhongbin's heart sank, but he had expected this result. Understand. I will do it myself to convince them. You just need to help me open this door. Jinbing looked at Zhongbin with a hint of admiration in his eyes. Okay, Zhongbin, I'll help you. But remember, the rest of the road is up to you. Zhongbin nodded, and an inexplicable determination surged in his heart. He knew that this road was destined to be full of thorns, but he had no choice. For those children living in the dark, he must move forward bravely. When leaving the club, night had fallen, and the city's neon lights flickered in the distance, as if adding a touch of false prosperity to this city that never sleeps. Zhongbin took a deep breath and stepped firmly towards the unknown challenge. He knew that the road ahead would not be smooth, but he knew even more that this was the road he had to go on. For the future of those children, he was willing to give it a try. As night fell, the streets of Hell's Kitchen seemed to be splashed with a layer of insoluble ink. The air was filled with the mixed smell of motor oil and rotten food. The dim street lights swayed in the cold wind, and occasionally a few rats ran through the garbage dump. Zhongbin stood at the school gate, his hands in his windbreaker pockets, staring deeply at the street corner not far away. This place is really rotten, Zhongbin whispered to himself, with a hint of reluctance and determination in his voice. He turned to look at his secretary, Sharon. We must solve the problem from the root, Sharon. These children, they should not grow up in such an environment. Sharon pushed her glasses and nodded seriously. Yes, Mr. Zheng. It is enough to strengthen security measures. The situation is much more complicated. Zhongbin raised his mouth slightly, revealing an unquestionable firmness. Enough. As long as we can give children a relatively safe learning environment, they have hope, even if it is just a little bit. He paused, his eyes became sharper. I want these children to understand that even in hell, they can create a colorful black. Sharon looked at Zhongbin, and a feeling of admiration surged in her heart. But she couldn't help but remind him, I will immediately arrange for workers to install electrified barbed wire on the wall to ensure that the only way in and out of the school is the gate. However, doing so may cause dissatisfaction among some gangs of Lima. Zhongbin sneered, dissatisfied? Let them come to me. I want to protect the future of these children, not the interests of those scum. At the same time, in a hidden factory not far from the school, the air was filled with the smell of motor oil and metal. The factory is ostensibly a vehicle repair and modification shop, but in reality it is the headquarters of an Irish gang. Inside the office, the lights are dim, with a few tattered Irish flags hanging on the wall and an invitation letter placed on a tattered table. Twin brothers Tom and Ralph sat at the table, holding whiskey glasses in their hands. Tom was tall, with a stubble on his face and a serious look. Ralph was relatively thin, but his eyes were cunning. "Tom, look at this." Ralph handed the invitation to Tom, his tone full of sarcasm and dissatisfaction. "Kingpin's Mosquito invited us to attend a community school meeting. What a joke." Tom took the invitation, glanced at it roughly, and then snorted coldly. "What do they want to do? Want us to deal with those little brats? Kingpin's hand is too long." Ralph shook his head in dissatisfaction. "He not only wants to interfere in the school, he is testing us." After Kingpin's rise, the influence of our Irish 360 gang is not as good as before, but he shouldn't underestimate us. Tom frowned, thought for a moment, and said, "We can't refuse directly. It will make us look afraid of him. But we can't completely obey. We have to find a way to let them know how powerful we are." A gleam of light flashed in Ralph's eyes. "Yes, we can go to the meeting, but we must let them know that any decision of Hell's Kitchen cannot be made without the participation of our Irish gangs." The two looked at each other and nodded in tacit understanding. On the street outside the factory, vehicles occasionally passed by, and the lights flickered in the night, as if foreshadowing the coming of 10 storms. "We must let them, Sifa, know that the Irish gangs are still there and should not be underestimated." Ralph raised his glass and sneered at the corners of his mouth. Tom also raised his glass, and the two clinked their glasses lightly, making a crisp sound. In this dark Hell's Kitchen, a new contest is quietly brewing. As night fell, the neon lights of Hell's Kitchen flickered in the drizzle, reflecting the muddy puddles on the street. There was a damp and corrupt smell in the air, as if the soul of the city was slowly rotting. Tom Ralph stood in his dim office, looking at the outside world through the stained window. His younger brother Jerry stood aside with a look of disdain on his face. "Don't you think Gene Bing takes himself too seriously? It's just a few invitations. Why should we go to support him?" Jerry's voice was full of provocation. He didn't take Gene Bing seriously at all. Tom didn't answer immediately. He turned around, and his expression was as gloomy as the weather outside. "Jerry, you are too impulsive. Gene Bing now thinks he is the master here. We can't confront him head on." Jerry sneered. "Master? Who does he think he is? We don't need to give him face. If he pushes him too far, we will be in trouble." Tom frowned. He knew that Jerry's temper needed to be guided. "You are still too young. Gene Bing is not so easy to deal with. But you are right. We don't need to give him face." He paused. A gleam of light flashed in his eyes. "But we have to be smarter than him." Jerry was obviously confused by Tom's words. "What do you mean?" Tom walked to the table, picked up a golden invitation letter, and played with it in his hands. "Mrs. Gao has contacted me," he whispered, as if the name had some kind of magic. "To read Jing Shuang's novels, go to Feilu Novel Network." Jerry's eyes widened. "Mrs. Gao the Hand? How could she? She is very clear about the situation between us and Gene Bing, and knows that Gene is not reliable. She suggested that we join forces to get rid of Gene Bing." Tom's voice was low and powerful, as if squeezed out from the depths of his throat. Jerry took a breath. "Join forces? What does she want us to do?" "She said that as long as our AI air gang can get rid of Gene Bing, the Hand will support us to become the new owner of Hell's Kitchen." Tom's words were like a bomb that exploded in Jerry's mind. Jerry was stunned. He didn't expect things to develop to this point. He opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. Tom looked at his brother and continued. "Although Gene Bing's power is great, he also has weaknesses. His godson Zheng Bin is not to be feared. Our real opponent is Gene Bing himself." Jerry's eyes became complicated, and he began to understand Tom's strategy. "So we have to gather forces secretly and wait for the opportunity." Tom nodded. That's right. We have to let everyone know that Jean is not invincible. Gather all those who have received the invitation letter, and we will go to the meeting together. Jerry finally smiled. Okay, I will go to gather the brothers. Let them know that the AI gang is not easy to mess with. Tom patted his brother's shoulder. Be careful and don't alert the snake. Jean Wan spies are everywhere. Jerry nodded and turned away. Tom looked out the window again, and the rain seemed to be getting heavier. He knew in his heart that the storm had just begun. At the same time, at the edge of Hell's Kitchen, in the territory of the Mexican gang, the air was filled with a stronger smell of drugs. In the narrow alleys, the dilapidated buildings stood like ruins, and the walls were covered with graffiti. The environment here is complex, and the population density is high, which is the best place for crime and escape. Carlos, the boss of the Mexican gang, was sitting in a dim basement, and his men were reporting the latest intelligence to him. The AI gang is gathering, and they may target Kingpin. Carlos smiled slightly, revealing his yellow teeth. Kingpin? He won't live long. Madame Gao has already informed us that as long as Kingpin dies, we can also get a share. His men nodded. Then what should we do? Carlos' eyes became cold. Hold on and wait and see. When the AI gang and Kingpin are both defeated, we will take action to clean up the mess. The basement was silent, with only the ticking of the wall clock echoing. Carlos knew that in this power game in Hell's Kitchen, whoever laughs last is the real winner. And on the streets, drug addicts and outsiders wandered like ghosts. Their eyes were empty, as if they had lost their souls. This is the darkest corner of Hell's Kitchen, and the last refuge for those who want to escape reality. The air is filled with despair and despair, as if every corner of the city is waiting to be saved or destroyed. The dusk in the Mexican slums is like being covered by a gray filter. The low houses are close together, the dilapidated walls are covered with graffiti, and the air is filled with corruption and despair. On the narrow streets, you can occasionally see a few skinny wild dogs rummaging through the garbage dump for food. This place is Gus' territory, a corner full of danger and violence. In a house with a shabby appearance, it is a different scene. The heavy curtains cover the desolation of the outside world, and the tapestries on the wall and the exquisite chandeliers seem out of place. Gus, the leader of the gang, is sitting on a leather sofa inlaid with gems, holding a glass of whiskey in his hand. Around him are a group of Latino gang members who also live a luxurious life, some of whom are smoking cigars, and some are playing with guns in their hands. Please send flower 0. Bang! The door was pushed open, and a confidant carrying an AK-47 walked in quickly, with a hint of nervousness on his face. Boss, there's a letter from Jean Bing. 0. Gus frowned, took the envelope, roughly tore open the seal, and pulled out the invitation letter inside. His eyes quickly scanned the contents of the letter, and the expression on his face gradually became ferocious. Zhang Bin, he dared to invite me. Gus' voice seemed to be squeezed out from between his teeth with uncontrollable anger. This be asterisk, 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 D actually wants to talk about cooperation with me? Who does he think he is? He suddenly crumpled the invitation letter into a ball and threw it to the ground. Did you hear what he said? Looking forward to discussing big plans with you, huh? If I see him at the meeting, I will definitely pull out my gun and send him to hell. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became tense, and the gang members looked at each other, and no one dared to speak. Gus stood up and paced back and forth, obviously thinking about the next move 3. We can't let him succeed so easily. Gus's eyes flashed with a hint of viciousness. I'm going to give him a gift. You go find a drug addict, plant a time bomb on him, and let him detonate it at the meeting. His words were cold and ruthless, as if he was talking about something that was too ordinary. The confidant nodded and immediately took out his phone to make arrangements. But this is not enough, Gus continued, his voice full of hatred. Zhang Bin, that be asterisk, 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 asterisk D, opposed my business here at 737, causing my men to hit a wall repeatedly. This time, I want him to die without a burial place. He looked at his confidant with an unquestionable command in his tone. You go hire those mutant mercenaries and tell them that I will pay them double the reward Song Yan killed. The room was silent, with only Gust's voice echoing. His plan was cold and careful, and every detail revealed his viciousness and determination. I want Zheng Bin to know what the consequences of offending me are. The flame of revenge flashed in Gust's eyes, as if he had seen the end of Zheng Bin. The gang members acted quickly and each went to execute Gust's orders. The atmosphere in the room was still tense, but there was more suppressed excitement. Everyone understood that this would be a bloody contest, and Gust would never give up easily. The night gradually fell, and the dilapidated houses in the slums looked even more gloomy in the night. And in that luxurious house, Gust's revenge plan had just begun. As the night fell, the neon lights of Hell's Kitchen flickered in the humid air, reflecting the dirt and unbearableness of every corner of the street. Rain dripped along the dilapidated signs, like background music for the sins of this city. Zheng Bin stood at the entrance of a dark alley, holding an unlit cigarette in his hand, his brows furrowed. Cutting off someone's wealth is like killing their parents. Gust's voice seemed to come from the depths of hell, with endless resentment and anger. But money is much more important to me than my parents. Zheng Bin smiled coldly and put the cigarette back into the cigarette box. Gust, your greed will lead you to a dead end. Dead end? Humph. Gust sneered, his eyes flashing with madness. I have nothing to lose. But you, Zheng Bin, you will lose everything. I will make you have no place to stand in Hell's Kitchen. Gust's plan has already taken shape in his mind. He will not do it himself. That would be too easy for Zheng Bin. He will use chaos and 10 real disasters to destroy Zheng Bin's reputation and things. Human bomb, the perfect tool. Gust muttered to himself, his fingers tapping lightly on the table, as if playing a piece of death music. Even if Zheng Bin can't be killed, his territory can be bloody, making it difficult for him to gain a foothold in the gang. A cruel smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Even if the plan fails, he will not lose anything. He has enough funds to continue to hire mutant to perform similar tasks until Zheng Bin is dead. At the same time, on the other side of Hell's Kitchen, bordering the rich area, the atmosphere in the territory of the Razor Gang seemed unusually calm. The streets here are clean and the street lights are bright, which is in sharp contrast to the dilapidated Hell's Kitchen. In a typical British-style villa, Tommy Shelby sat quietly on the sofa, holding a cup of English afternoon tea in his hand. His eyes were deep and indifferent, as if he could see through everything. On the table was an opened invitation letter, which was sent by Zheng Bin, inviting him to attend a so-called 1.3 peace party. Peace! Tommy snorted contemptuously and put the invitation letter back on the table. Zheng Bin and Jean Bing. When did these guys become so naive? His thoughts went back to when his brother Arthur was still alive. How glorious the Razor Gang was at that time. Arthur's leadership allowed the gang to stand firm in countless gang wars. But now, Arthur is gone, and he's the only one left to support the entire family. Tommy, our spies reported that Gust is planning a big move. John, a subordinate beside him, whispered with a little uneasiness in his tone. Tommy raised his eyebrows slightly, picked up the teacup, and took a sip. Big move? He wants to use a bomb? Humph, typical Gust style. Yes, he wants to create chaos, even at the expense of innocent people. John continued. Innocent? Tommy sneered. There is no innocence in Hell's Kitchen. Everyone has their own sins. However, Gust's plan may be an opportunity for us. He put down the teacup, stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the brightly lit wealthy area in the distance. We can take this opportunity to weaken the power of Zheng Bin and Jean Bing. After all, in chaos, no one knows what will happen. 11 foot. You mean we secretly support Gust? John was a little surprised. No, we don't support him. We just add fuel to the fire when necessary. Tommy's eyes became sharp. We need to let everyone know that Razor is the real master of Hell's Kitchen. As soon as he finished speaking, a burst of hurried footsteps came from outside the door. A subordinate hurried in with a panicked look. Tommy, Gus people have already started to act. They are carrying bombs, and their target is Zhang Bin's party. Tommy's expression did not change at all, but he nodded slightly. The show is about to begin. He turned and looked at John with a firm gaze. Pass the order down. All the Razor Party members are ready. We must seize our opportunity in this chaos. Under the night, the streets of Hell's Kitchen became darker. The rain was still dripping, as if playing the final prelude to the tragedy that was about to take place. In an abandoned warehouse not far away, Gus men were nervously preparing for their mission. They were tied with simple explosives, and their eyes flashed with fanaticism and despair. Remember, our target is not Zhang Bin, but to create chaos. 11 Gus stood in front of them, his voice low and powerful. As long as there is chaos, Zhang Bin and Jin Bing will find it difficult to escape. Our mission will be successful. The men nodded one after another, their eyes full of determination. They knew that this was a road of no return. But for them, this might be the only thing they could do for Gust and for their own survival. Action! Gust gave an order, and the men left the warehouse one after another and disappeared into the night. In the villa, Tommy Shelby stood in front of the window, looking at the darkness approaching in the distance, with a meaningful smile on his lips. Zhang Bin, Jin Bing, this game has just begun. He said softly. His voice was covered by the sound of rain, as if it had never existed. The rain was getting heavier, and the whole Hell's Kitchen seemed to be shrouded in a hazy mist. The neon lights on the street were still flashing, but in this rain curtain, they seemed particularly powerless. A storm was quietly brewing. In the dim bar, the lights were dim, and the air was filled with the mixed smell of tobacco and cheap alcohol. At a worn-out wooden table, Vongala I, the young Asian man with a yellow quill, was scanning his men with his hawk-like eyes. His fingers tapped lightly on the table, as if he was beating some kind of silent beat. We must take 950 of this place tonight. Vongala I's voice was low but full of deterrence, as if every word carried a blade. His men moved quickly and orderly, moving supplies and checking weapons. The whole process was like a precision-operated machine. Boss, those guys in Midtown are not easy to mess with. Are we taking too much risk by being so anxious? A subordinate asked with some concern. Vongala I sneered, and a trace of disdain flashed in his eyes. Risk? In Hell's Kitchen, if you don't take risks, you can only wait for death. Those guys are kings of their own, and no one is willing to submit to anyone else. This is our best opportunity. 11. At the moment, the door of the bar was pushed open, and a familiar figure walked in. It was Zhang Bin, who was wearing a dark windbreaker and had a usual calm expression on his face.
Hello, everyone. As we wrap up this video, I want to share a quick note. I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support me and enjoy on-demand audiobooks, you can become a Patreon member. Alternatively, you can check out my Google Drive link, which has 500+ novel audiobooks available through my Ko-fi or Patreon shop. I appreciate your support.